Well, after a big year with Southend United, it is time today for our final look at this series and this database. We're going to move 5 years in the future after our resignation and retirement from Southend, and we're going to see, as we have at previous clubs with One Cup challenges, whether they've continued to rise at the top or whether they have fallen back down to mediocrity. I'm sure they won't have made it back to the National League, but let's see how they're getting on and how many of our stars are still involved at the club. Yes, hello, and welcome along to the 156th and final part of Saving Southend with me, Daniel. We did our job, we got them to the top, and we won a few of the major trophies in world football. And after 17 years, we retired, we resigned, and we left the world of Southend United. But what's happened in the 5 years since? Have our stars stayed at the club? Has the wage bill become astronomical? And has the club fallen from grace or stayed up amongst the elite? We're going to find out the answer today. We're also going to join in with what a lot of you are doing in the comments already, which is pick our best ever 11 at Southend, which is going to be tricky because mixing the eras from players that got us through the divisions to ones that helped us establish at the top, and then the ones that became the superstars at the end, always a difficult task. But get your 11s down in the comments. We will continue to do the same later. But for now, if you're looking forward to this one, seeing where Southend United are and how many managers they've had since we were there, then please do put a thumbs up on the video. Let's go straight over to the club. Of course, our manager retired from the game, so we've just chucked in another one so we could holiday. We're going to go straight to Southend United and see what the key events are from the last 5 seasons, exactly 5 years to the day after our last episode. Well, some good news off the bat for us, I think, here. We are still a club legend, which is important. But most importantly, Southend United have finished 4th in 2045, so they're still up amongst the elite. Two players, a captain and vice-captain that we know very well in Kivrakidis and Hansen. Manager, though, is Vincenzo Italiano, who has been at the club for 1 season, having previously been at Manchester City, Real Madrid, Newcastle, Spurs, etc. 13 years as Real Madrid manager. Not bad going at all. Let's start with the manager history. How has it been since we were there? Very interesting. Pochettino took over for 3 years and then retired from management as well. But if you look at his trophy haul, yes, the first season he only won the Community Shield, but the second year and the third year he won the Premier League. So Southend United, probably unlike any club we've had before in these saves, have continued right at the top. So that's at least two titles in the last 5 years, 2 Community Shields, and they got another Carabao Cup as well. Maurizio Pochettino continued the dynasty. I'll be interested to see if he lost as many cup finals as me did elsewhere. Then after that, they had Darnell Furlong for 1.5 years, the former Arsenal manager. He won an FA Cup. Okay, so it's not been a disaster for them, has it? Then the last year, they had a caretaker, followed by Italiano. He won nothing in the last half a season, but he seemingly got Southend back up into the top 4. So let's go and have a look in addition to this at the history of the competitions to see if there were any other finals. Oh, wow. Italiano did make an impact this year. They got to the final of the Champions League where they were runners-up. Pochettino also had one as well. They were runners-up in the Premier League in 2041. So Pochettino finished second, first and first, won a Carabao Cup, also got to a Champions League final, won a couple of Community Shields as well. I mean, they've only got to one FA Cup final, which is a little disappointing. It's not been the constant stream of finals that we had, but you could argue they've won more competitions. They've been as successful. There's definitely no downturn there, really, from Southend. We look at the Premier League this year. Newcastle seem to be having a phase. The last 2 years they've won it. Lawrence Shankland is manager. I was about to ask, is it still Arne Slot? How long's he been there? Lawrence Shankland has joined Southend United and won 2 successive titles. He's also won the Champions League this year. Lawrence Shankland, this is breaking news. Lawrence Shankland is the best manager in club world football in 2045. Oh, he won the Champions League both years. It's better than I thought. Shankland has taken over a Newcastle side in 2043 that I don't think had ever won the Premier League. No, and he's just waltzed in, won Premier League and Champions League doubles back to back. Did he win anything else? I've got to look at this. He won a Super Cup. He won a Carabao Cup. He didn't win an FA Cup. That's the only thing letting him down. I mean, it's still a lot of the team that was there before. They've got our number one, Cusqueta. No wonder they're doing so well. He's bought Cusqueta in, which seems to be a very clever signing. I mean, in a grand scheme of things, bar Cusqueta in the first summer, he didn't actually do anything. He's not signed anyone. He's made a transfer profit. Lawrence Shankland has taken over the story of this save. Who would have thought that when we started off? Let's get back to Southend United though, because I already saw that they bought in one of our former transfer targets, Louis Soler, who's just brilliant. They've also changed style. They've gone to a 4-2-3-1. But as you can see, there's a lot of the original players we were used to. They've obviously got a new goalkeeper who is just as good as Cusqueta, in fairness. And they've also promoted Unai Goni, who was a wonder kid that we bought in. And he is now one of the best centre-halves in world football. Just shows how good our youth scouting was. I'm looking further down. There are a few more that they're letting get to retirement age. So you can see Elmi is coming to the end of his career there. Mikey Magwood has made the first team squad. Not featuring a lot, but he's in there probably to meet the homegrown quota. But otherwise, you've got a good 10 of the players we had 5 years ago still. On the bench there is Nana Fair, Logan McNaughton as sub-keeper. But then in a starting lineup, you've still got Marciano, Robertson, Bernberg, Torres, Memic, Kivrakidis. Really impressed by how many are still there and how well the club has done. Unfortunately, though, they have been outshone by Lawrence Shankland, so a little bit disappointing for them on that front. Otherwise, though, great to see Southend United competing at the elite. I want to have a look at the transfer activity as well, see what's been going on, who the big sales have been. Bit surprised by the looks of last season. They sold a Vucic for a little fee, but we'll come back to that. Let's look at what happened after we left the club. So they had Katala and they had Garnier. That was our last season. Did they sell anyone right at the start of that summer? No. So that's when we left. Let's see what happened after. They bought Katala back again the January after. They also got a loan from Real Madrid, but no permanent signings. The Ucolano deal was pre-agreed, but look at the players they've loaned out. Ashley Carr was sold. Muscat was loaned out. Ivanov was sold. Vasquez was sold for not a lot of money as well, although a few of those were complaining contractually, so we maybe left them in a difficult spot with that. The year after, 300 million spent. No wonder they went on and won things. That's when they got their new goalkeeper, loads of other players that we saw in that squad. So Richard Dale was still there, Thiago was still there. They're good players, and in fairness, they're younger players. Barbita, who's now 35. But they're not bad signings overall. Harold Cuero, now 33, the other one, but would have been a ready-made player at that point. They did, though, lose Christian Rakowski for free, which is a real pain, although he's declined a lot. So I wonder if he had injuries either before or after he left. On the complete flip side of that, they got 100 million for Muscat, 30 million for Jimenez, who we tried and failed to sell. Andre went for 35. Gouillard went on loan, for Zoli on loan, but a real weird mix of transfer fees. And they loaned out of Vucic again, which doesn't make sense to me because he was really impressing. One signing the following winter, didn't do a lot in the summer, so they had a massive year of 300 million, then nothing. They seem to be doing it every other season. Fazoli was one of the youth players that got sold. Gouillard got sold. But otherwise, not a lot after that. And then if we go to the last 2 seasons, we saw a Vucic got sold permanently. Vite was on that list. He went to Nottingham Forest. Cusqueta went for massive money, we know. So he must have been number 2 before he left because the other keeper came in 3 years earlier. They only spent 40 million. So again, you all had a go at me for not spending my transfer budget. They didn't do it either. No signings the first year, despite having 500 million in the bank. They then spent 300 million the year after, but since then, despite selling loads, they've not really bought anyone. They've made a transfer profit nearly every year. This season, a few legends have moved on. So Jan Carlos has left the club at 34. Lewis Herbert has left the club at 35. I've forgiven him now for the cup final. 60 million for Bundegaard, another one of those youngsters that we were going to introduce to the first team had we stayed a bit longer. But yeah, a few surprises in terms of the balance of transfer fees, but otherwise, probably impressed with how much of that squad they've kept together and how well they've stayed near the top of English football. It's only really Newcastle that have bettered them in the last 5 years. So as we look at that, we say a well done to Southend United. We say a well done to our former club and a lot of our former players for staying up there. But I wanted to have a look at this screen before we finished off, which is the best 11. How did the club rate the best 11 now? Because this point we will have had 5 years since we left where people could have become stars. I'm guessing those who have stayed at the top level will have broken in. But I want to see if any of our old originals are in that best 11. And then I'm going to agonise with you and pick my favourite team. Probably not the best team because obviously that would just be the players we ended with. But the team that were most important to me as we went through. So how many of the old boys are still in there? I mean, in the starting 11, there are none of the players who got us through the divisions. On the bench, there's still a couple, but very few. Now, the one area I am going to agree with as we start off, and you can give me your thoughts on this as we go along, anyone I forget, etc. They've nailed goalkeeper. There are two goalkeepers that have covered probably most of the final 15 years of our save. Jude Sadler was just something else. He was the man. But don't forget Daniel Rose, the first player I paid a fee for. I rejected a free agent goalkeeper in League Two and spent 175 grand on him, which was considered silly at the time and unlike me. But he got us through the divisions and he was sensational. We then got 2.5 million for him after over 200 league appearances. And he led us to, I think, all 3 promotions in the end, didn't he? He was an absolute gem of a player. Loved him. Him and Sadler, the best 2 keepers by a mile. But I have to agree there. Jude Sadler just edges it. If we move into defence, it's where we start to have those sort of heartstrings pulled. Is it going to be people from the rise through the divisions, or is it going to be people who ultimately were giving us success in the end? Now, they've sort of cheated by putting Kivrakidis at the back, and him and Herbert stayed another 4 years after we finished, so I get why they're in here. Storen Hansen's on the bench, but the other sub is the one I have to pick. Harrison Parker was the only player who I think played for us in all 5 divisions regularly. I know we're going to come to another player who featured in all 5 later, but this is the only one who was a regular. He was in that Europa League final winning team. He was in that team or that squad that won the Premier League. And he won an FA Cup on the pitch as well. So he's a player who was a real feature for us. And again, we got big money for him in the end, like 15 million quid. So Harrison Parker has to be one of my centre halves. The other one, I'm torn between 2. And they are Jarell Kwanzaa, whose impact was magnificent, particularly the height from set pieces. And the reason he's closer than he would have been is because Lewis Herbert did what he did in our final ever game in that FA Cup final. However, I can't deny him, can I? He played such a big role. Hat-tricks in Champions League, quarter and semi-finals from headers. He was a key part of the team that won all the trophies. And I have to give him his place after 8 years for me and then a Final 4 after we left the club. Lewis Herbert in alongside Harrison Parker. They will be our central defensive too. And both of them, it should be noted as well, had to play left centre-half as right footers due to their partners wanting to be on the right of a 2. And they deserve big credit for that because that helped us along. At left back, the man I'm going to pick is not involved in this squad because it's an overachiever. Jan Carlos probably would be the second best. He did a really good job for us. There was also a left midfield candidate who ended up going to left back at times who was great. But I have to go for another one of the legends, don't I? Let me get the man up, and I'm sure you won't disagree with it. I, of course, have to go for Cameron Ishmael, a man who joined us in, I think, League 2, maybe League 1 in 2027, stayed with us for 8 years, played 196 games, crucial part of the side that survived in the Premier League, became an international under us, and then went for over 15 million as well. But another one of those who was part of our side in the EFL for a couple of promotions. You can see actually he was involved in the 2029 Championship promotion, the 2035 Premier League title win, and also in the Europa League and FA Cup wins before that. So he's a player who helped us through the lower leagues and then was part of the Premier League winning squad again. And those ones, like we had with Harrison Parker, I just can't turn down. So Cameron Ishmael is in as my left back. But then right back is probably the hardest position to pick because we didn't really have a great right back at any point of the save. We had a couple of good ones early on that helped us out through the divisions. But once we got to the Premier League, it was one of the first positions we replaced. We also had 3 or 4 throughout our time in the Premier League. So a couple of drifters early on. Memic then did a few years. We also then had Ivusic at the end. And the thing that puts me off Memic is he kept throwing his toys out the pram near the end as well. He was with us for the final 6 seasons. He consistently played and did well. I'm wondering whether, just to make it work, I could chuck Rakowski at right back, but then he was only actually a first teamer for me for about 5 seasons. So right back is probably the hardest one to pick where I don't have an absolute standout. There were a couple of players I liked in the lower leagues, but not that made enough of an impact that I feel I could keep them in. Again, there's an argument I could chuck Jarell Kwanzaa out there, maybe give him the opportunity, but I think we have to be fair and probably pick Memic. As much as I would argue of our 11, right back is without doubt the weakest position in terms of a favourite player or an impactful player. But Armin Memic I'll put in there just to keep up with the new guard as well. So that gives us Sadler in goal. Memic and Herbert will be in my back four, but it will be Parker and Ishmael alongside them. We then move into midfield, and I'm sorry, I have to swap the right wingers because Julian Yocolano made such an impact for the club. He joined just after we got to the Premier League, helped us through the division, and again scored some big goals. Takatsuka deserves a shout out on the right as well, but because of Yocolano, he wasn't first choice for as long. And again, we did have some very good players earlier on in the divisions, but I think I have to go for Yocolano. 9 seasons, 230 league games. I mean, he made a big impact, and he scored some massive goals in cup competitions as well. So Yocolano is my right winger. But over on the left, I'm going to throw in probably my wild card, a player who, again, a little bit of a gamble financially because he was a player I bought on for bigger wages when we were in the National League. And in the end, he became a crucial part of a side that got all the way up to the Championship and did cover at left back and help us out as well. So I'm not going to pick Adamson, despite the fact he gave me, 7 years? He did have some moments where he got stupid red cards in big games, cost me things. And the problem with him and Vasquez is neither of them were really consistent near the end, whereas this man was. So I'm not going to go for Dan Mooney right at the start. I'll go for this guy. Will Ferry is going to be my left winger. He was only with us for 6 years, made 146 appearances, but he was part of all 4 promotions. And I know he wasn't a regular in the Championship one. He was a regular in the first 3. He featured in the 4th. And he became synonymous with that side that went through the divisions. And he's actually one of my favourite players from the Save. Never ended up playing for another club after us, but just a wonderful player, consistent performer. And I feel like we gave him a home. We made him a career. And he delivered for us every step of the way. Him and Ishmael were a key part as we went through the EFL. And they will be the left side of our football pitch. I have no problems with that. In the middle, it becomes a lot tougher. There is one role that I'm certain of, which is going to a former hero we'll talk about in a minute. And again, one of those who featured across the board. But I've basically got to choose alongside them between all of these legends. Peter Bernberg is someone who frustrated me a lot over the years. Kivrakidis is someone who threw his toys out the pram a lot. Torres had a couple of very disappointing days at Wembley. There is a strong argument for Joaquin Jimenez, who wasn't the best performer in the world, but really gave everything for the club, became incredibly important. I'd love to know, actually. I'm going to have a look at how many games he played for us. So he's 33 now. To be fair, no, do you know what? I am going to go for him. I'm not going to go for any of those legends at the end because they didn't play enough games for me and they all annoyed me in different ways. I am going to go for Joaquin Jimenez, who joined us when we got promoted in 2029 for 5.75 million. He was a key part of the side that survived the first 2 years. Then he was first team or rotation until 2038, which is when we were winning tons of trophies. So he's been a part of so many of the big nights. He's won everything apart from the Carabao Cup because he was out on loan then. He actually came back the year after this finished and we left the club and played again for them off the bench 13 times. And then the club got 30 million for him. So, do you know what? I'm going to put Joaquin Jimenez in there. We're going to go for 2 of the old boys from different eras. And the ironic thing about Joaquin Jimenez is he actually took over from someone who was a really crucial part of the squad as well, and who was a key member of all 4 promotions. Can anyone guess it? It's this guy. Yes, of course, I had to put him in. Jack Morehouse joined the club at the end of season 1, then became part of that superstar squad that improved and helped us get promoted in the National League, played the full season in that promotion year. He was signed as a free agent after being released from United at the end of the first season. And look at him. He's so good. Featured till 2032. I know we basically only gave him Premier League appearances as a sentimental factor because he wasn't good enough when we got there. He was a 5th choice midfielder. But we took a player from non-league football 4 successive promotions, played in the Premier League, became an island international, and just reached every single ounce of his potential throughout. I'm trying to look at his little reel here. I know he had a little loan spell out in his final season. He didn't feature a huge amount, but he won the National League, he won the Championship, and he was a big part of both squads, and he featured tons in between, as you know. So Jack Morehouse for me is someone who I sort of consider synonymous with this save. Probably him and Parker are the two that I consider most synonymous with this save throughout the divisions, the ones that took us all the way and were able to be key parts of it. So Morehouse and Jimenez will maybe be my surprise midfield two. That leaves us with a midfield 4 of them two, alongside Yucalano on the right, and on the left, Will Ferry. But then we get to the hardest part. What do we do up front? Because, look, the strikers we finished the save with, Nana Fair, not so much. He'd only been there a couple of years. He's obviously stayed and become a star since. Joe Wills and Teddy Ivanov were the players I signed when we got promoted to the Premier League. Joe Wills came a couple of years later. 21 million was a record transfer and a bit of a gamble at the time. He was a little inconsistent in terms of his goal output. He had 2 phenomenal seasons and then a lot of pretty decent ones. But the last season that we were there was the only time he didn't get double figures, which over 9 years is a pretty good effort. The only thing that puts me down for him is I had to keep taking him off because his natural fitness was always terrible. It's actually improved since we left for some reason. The other one, of course, Liban Elmi, didn't feature for too long, but he did score the crucial goals in Champions League and Cup finals. We also have Teddy Ivanov, who actually didn't play as much or score as much as we think, because yes, he featured for us 260 times, albeit a few of those were the year after we left. He won everything. He was so crucial to that survival the first season. He joined us for a record 14 million at the time, and his goals did keep us up the first year. I do have to say, though, he didn't score as many as we thought, but he scored big goals, even to the end. He won 14 trophies with the football club, all under me, apart from the last Community Shield. He didn't score as many as Joe Wills, but I feel like the last few years he was a substitute and he still kept up his scoring record. So Ivanov maybe just edges above Joe Wills on the moments, rather than the number of goals overall. But then we've got to consider the other ones as well, because we sort of had target forwards that delivered the whole way along. I'm not putting Jayden Danz in just because he rejected that 14 million move to Sunderland and ended up leaving for next to nothing. That cost us. But we've got 3, haven't we? We started with Harry Cardwell, who fired us to the first 2 promotions. We then had Aaron Presley, who fired us to the next one and a bit. And then we had Joe Hugill. Now, Joe Hugill has to get a mention for me because I'm interested to actually go back now and see their respective records. So I want to compare the 3 of them before we make our decision and decide whether it's going to be Ivanov and Wills or if these 3 are going to break in. Now, Joe Hugill was at the club as a player for 8 seasons. The game that I probably remember him most from was the 2033 Europa League final, where he came on and starred. Remember, we went 2 down in 3 minutes. Joe Hugill came on and saved the day. And that was the start of the big trophy trail. So he probably deserves a feature for that. If you look at his goal record for us, it's not actually that great. It's probably, of the ones we're going to cover, Ivanov, Wills, Presley and Cardwell, he's probably got the worst goal record of the lot. He scored crucial goals when we got promoted from the Championship. In the Premier League, he scored not as many, but you've got to bear in mind, those first 2 to 3 seasons, we were battling relegation, and to get 9, 10 and 11 respectively, probably not a terrible effort at all. After that, he didn't pop up with that many, but there were crucial goals and largely off the bench. But did he have enough of a lasting impact for me to put him in? Again, probably one where heart would rule head, but I've got to look at the other 2 out of fairness. Now, Harry Cardwell was the original. His goal record for us was outstanding. The first 2 seasons, he was the reason we reached an FA Trophy final, and the second year, he was basically the reason we got promoted, despite the fact we had an average team. He became an incredible feature for the club. Of course, he didn't then go on and play for a long time. He was overtaken by Presley pretty quickly. But he won the National League top scorer both for the first 2 years and was a crucial part of getting us started. So a very big shout out for him. The other one has to be Aaron Presley. If we compare him, again only at the club for 5 seasons, did feature in that first Premier League year, won the Championship, obviously part of the promotions from League 2 and League 1 as well. Again, the goal record's not outstanding. It's about 1 in 2.5. They're not as good as we perhaps remember them being. But the problem with Cardwell, with Hugill, and with Presley is they all became subs towards the end of their career. So they've got 2 or 3 seasons of largely substitute appearances there, which makes that record pretty outstanding. It really makes it hard for me, this. I've got an instinct in my mind based on who my 2 favourites are. I think if you were to pick 2 from any of those 5, I wouldn't criticise you. I think I'd say fair enough. You've got an argument for all of them. I'm not going to pick Joe Wills. Of the 2 current ones, I'm going to pick Teddy Ivanov. Because, again, the players that I remember are the ones that had the most big moments. Teddy Ivanov had huge moments, even in that final season to help us regain the Premier League. Remember the Carabao Cup final the year before where we were 3-0 down at Liverpool and he popped up with 2 goals and an assist? Like, he just had so many of those moments. And alongside him, I think you know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put Joe Hugill. One of the worst records of the 5, but he scored the goals that won that first big trophy. He was a key factor in the promotion and then our success early in the Premier League. He's just my favourite. I can't explain it. He's just my favourite striker at this save. So despite all the achievements and the goals of the others, and by the way, I should probably give a shout out to Dion Kranic, shouldn't I? Before we finish off with a striker, I'm not picking him because he threw his toys out the pram and he left a little bit too early. He was only with us in the end for 4 seasons. But a player we signed for 9 million and sold for 170, who's become a superstar for Real Madrid, a Galactico. His goal record for us, he would have been the best. If he'd stayed those final 2 or 3 seasons, he would have broken it. He would have got in. But he wanted to go straight away. He was just beyond us at that stage. But he was the best striker we ever had. But my favourite 2, and the 2 I'm going to stick with at the end here, I'm going to go, not for Joe Wills, I'm putting Ivanov off the bench ahead of him. I'm putting him alongside Joe Hugill. So my 11, how many do we agree with? Only 3, I think, in the end. I've stuck with Sadler. I've stuck with Memic reluctantly and Herbert. Then I've got Harrison Parker and Cameron Ishmael. My midfield, I've promoted Giuliano from the bench. I've also gone for a midfield two of Joaquin Jimenez and Jack Morehouse. Bit of a surprise in there. On the left-hand side, Will Ferry. And up front, I've gone for Joe Hugill and Teddy Ivanov. So 2 of the subs are in there. Daniel Rose would definitely be my sub goalkeeper. I'd probably still have Jan Carlos in my 18 in fairness. I'd probably have one of those midfield 3, maybe Kivrakidis in terms of outright quality. I'd definitely have Joe Wills on my bench. I'd probably also chuck one of those other 2 strikers on. So one of Presley or Cardwell, probably Aaron Presley. And the last spot on my bench has to be reserved for Keisuke Takatsuka, the only man that I'm going to include in this squad that we haven't looked at yet, to let him be the final player that we look at. And I'm basically putting him in purely off that 4-3 Newcastle game back in the day. But he also featured in that first Europa League final as well and was a key part off the bench there, set up one of the Ivanov goals. And I think he scored one as well. So he featured for us for 6 years. He was a superstar, came to us after the promotion and became a big part of our club, made us a massive profit, involved in the first Premier League, involved in the first Europa League and FA Cup. Keisuke Takatsuka is the final player on my bench. How does my squad compare to yours? My best 11? Let me know down in the comments below what you've gone for. Let me know how many of my 11 you agree with or any outstanding candidates that I failed to mention. I did almost put in a couple of experienced ones we signed along the way. We thought about it a little differently. But in the end, I think we've gone for a pretty good mix of the current superstars and the players that helped us get there. Let me know if you agree or disagree. If you enjoyed this save, this look back 5 years later. If you're surprised by how they're getting on, let me know. If you enjoyed it, chuck a thumbs up on the video, subscribe and turn that notification bell on because we are not finished with FM24. The daily series may be done. We've got a little teaser, haven't we? We will be back on Sunday evening to start a new weekly save, which if you're in the Discord or on my social medias, you will have seen a few screenshots and images from. We are going to be back to introduce and talk about a save that is going to see me have to manage in a very different style to usual and get used to working in a different manner to what I usually do. Hopefully you're looking forward to that. Come and join me to find out more on Sunday evening. There'll be plenty of other odd videos here and there and loads once we get the announcement for FM25 with save ideas and other stuff too. I am going to be a little bit quieter in the comments and that in the next few weeks as I am moving house during November, but we will still have the videos out weekly. So come and check them out and I hope you enjoyed a save. Don't forget to follow us on Twitch if you want to see us more often. We're going to be doing loads of live streams in that save, which I'm really enjoying with Aberdeen. And finally, you can also find a link in the eye above to the Football Podcast channel, where we've got championship predictions every single match day and loads of other fun stuff as well. It's been a great save. I've really enjoyed it. I thank you for all your comments, your views, your thumbs up and all of that stuff too. I hope you've been as invested in it as I have. It's been another great save with Southend United. It's going to be a different type of one next year, but saving Southend was the objective, and due to a fortunate takeover and some wonderful players and staff along the way, we've definitely managed to do that. They've stayed up there after us too. I'll see you next time on Sunday to introduce a brand new story.